We made it. Okay, so we now know 70 is not enough. We'll at least go for 85. So thank everybody for being here. This is such an interesting topic. The more I worked with these two folks, the more stories I heard. It's just heartbreaking, amazing.
And most of the stories are true.
And so you see that the handout includes on the back a commendation that John and Brenda got from the Criminal Justice Department. And I just want to say this represents really the thrust of Trace Talks. Finding out, actually it was Barry who made the comment, there are some people that have some very compelling stories here. And this is one of them. So I'm so happy to have Brenda and John share their experience of prison ministry.
Thank you, Frankie. Well, thank you everyone for attending. It's really warms my heart to see such a good turnout. Is my microphone okay? Can people hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, good. I would say, first of all, that God has had us on a really interesting journey. I never intended to set one foot ever inside a prison, but God had a different plan. So he moved places and people and things around, as you'll hear as I tell our story, to get us to do prison ministry here in the United States, as well as abroad. Or I should say, as well in Guatemala, not really abroad. Well, the way the story started was in 2004, I had gone on a mission trip with Houston's First Baptist Church to Guatemala. And I was just part of the group then. Well, after that mission trip in 2004, the church asked me to lead mission trips to Guatemala. So sometimes Brenda could go and sometimes she couldn't. So starting later on in 2005, we had a mission trip once a year that Brenda and I led to Guatemala in various places, mostly in the capital, Guatemala City. On the mission trip that I went on initially, we went to a Christian television station one night, and there was a young man there that came up to us and noticed that our worship pastor had a shirt on that said, "I heart Houston, I love Houston." And he said, "Oh, are you from Houston?" And we said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, I used to live in Houston." I said, "Oh, really?" And so he pulled back his sleeve, and there on his wrist was a prison tattoo of the skyline of the city of Houston. So this fellow is Ignacio Sanchez. This is he and his wife Sandra, and they have a gang and prison ministry in Guatemala. But when I first met him, he was working at the television station, and he would take a camera and go around the city and interview gang members. And he had been in a gang in Houston, so it didn't bother him at all to talk to, gang members. And the two primary gangs, or the two most violent gangs in Guatemala at that time, and maybe still today, are MS-13. Anyone here heard of MS-13? Okay. Well, I met a number of those lovely folks, and so did Brenda, on our trips down there. And also their biggest rival gang was Calle 18, 18th Street. So MS-13 and 18th Street were the two big gangs, and Ignacio had been interviewing them. So at any rate, he gave me his card and with his phone number and his email address and everything, and I didn't think much about it and put it in my pocket and brought it home with me to Houston after the trip. Well, I was preparing for one of the other mission trips, and I was working with a fellow by the name of Joel Van Dyke, who lived there in Guatemala City, and he helped churches put their itinerary or agenda together for places they were going to go and visit in Guatemala. And when I was talking with him one day, I said, "So what's new, Joel?" He said, "Well," he said, "there's been a tremendous amount of violence between the gangs are fighting and killing the police, and the police are fighting and killing them back. And a lot of the gangs have so much money, they have military-grade weapons, and sometimes we have to send the army in." He said, "It's a mess." And he said, "So the mayor and the chief of police, they want to get together and have a powwow and kind of get some kind of truce going between the gangs and the police in the city." And I said, "Wow, that's quite an undertaking." He said, "Yeah, we're not going to divulge the location until the last minute, but we're trying to get current gang members from each gang, each of the main gangs, and some former members. And he said, I'm trying to find somebody who can get a taxi and take some current gang members of 18th Street to this powwow. I said, well, you know, I got a business card from a guy 4 years ago. I don't know if it's still good, if his number's still good, if he's still involved, but Ignacio Sanchez, and here's his telephone number. So think about that for a minute. What are the odds that some old white guy in Houston, Texas is going to be able to get a guy to hop in a cab and take people to this powwow? But it happened. He got a hold of Ignacio. They did that project together, and so next time I talked to Joel, I said, so what's he doing? He said, well, he's got a full-fledged gang and prison ministry in Guatemala City. And I work with him now from time to time. So then in 2008, I contacted Ignacio and said, hey, you know, I'm coming with a group of about 9 of us. I've got 4 girls, 2 women, 2 men, and myself, and we're going to come and do various activities. What can I do to help your ministry? And so he said, well, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go into here's a map of Guatemala. You probably all know where it is. There's the big arrow there. So he said, I'd like for you and your group to go into Cárcel Preventiva with me and some of my helpers. I said, into a prison in Guatemala? I said, look, I got 4 girls, you know. Yeah, he said, no, he said, it's going to be fine. He said, you'll be safe with me and with my friends. And he said, I had a college group in here recently, and they said it was the highlight of their trip going into a prison. So at any rate, I thought, wow, that's really quite a testimony. So any rate, I talked to our group and I said, this is an opportunity we have. What do you think? And they said, let's pray about it. So we typically did before Mr. Trips, we prayed for about 4 months. And the reason that's important, you'll see in a moment. So off we go on our trip in November of 2008, and we were there a day in advance. We were at church on Sunday with the church we worked with, and Ignacio showed up because we were supposed to go to Cárcel Preventiva on Monday. He said, well, listen, something has happened over the weekend. He said, the government is trying to show how powerful and forceful it is. They took 3 people out of Cárcel Preventiva, where they house 18th Street, and put them in a general population prison. And he said, you know what that means? I said, yeah. He said, it means a death sentence. They wanted to have these guys killed. Because once they got to this new prison, they didn't have any of their gang members there. It was all rival gangs. Smaller ones, but rival ones. So they tried to get him out, but couldn't. And he said, here's what happened. Once the men got there, shortly afterwards, all 3 were beheaded. They put their heads on a pole, paraded it all around the prison, and then played soccer with their heads. Then they set their bodies on fire. He said, so the guys at Cárcel Preventiva are not in a very good mood. I said, that's an understatement. He said, so if you want a different activity, I'll try to find a different activity for you. He said, what do you think? So I turned to my group and I said, what do you think? They said, let's go. We want to go. We want to go to prison. So we went into the prison with that circumstance. And when you first went into this prison, you had to be searched and patted down. And so we did that, passed that inspection. Then they escort you with automatic weapons to some bars that look sort of like this, and then except the door's closed. And then there's actually 2 sets of doors. The guards open the first one, put you inside, lock you in, and then the prisoners unlock the other one, 18th Street guys, and they let you in. Well, it was a 2-story cell with just cells on the bottom floor, but like an extended ceiling on the top, and some areas for bathrooms. And it was designed to hold 60 people, but there were over 120. So some of them were sleeping on temporary mattresses and stuff, and it was just crazy. They were so happy to see us. It was like, Bob Hope going to visit the troops, right? We were the entertainment. So they're all curious about, what are all these girls doing here, and what are these Americans doing here? And so anyway, we took in gifts for them. We took in a pair of underwear for each man, new socks, 2 soccer balls, and some roping for their Christmas tree, because this was in November, and they had a Christmas tree inside. So they were glad to see us. The leader of the gang was there. His name was Abuelo, which, as you know, means grandfather. Well, usually the longest about you live in any of these gangs is about age 40. But he was alive there, and I mean, they're putting out hits on people. They're doing drug deals. They all had cell phones. All the leaders had cell phones inside the prison. And the guys were going in and out of their cell, rolling joints and smoking marijuana and coming out and just smoking marijuana. They were all shirtless from the waist up and just all kinds of tattoos all over, prison tattoos up on their neck, face, everything. It's really kind of weird. We were in groups of 3. There was a Spanish speaker in each group, and we just talked to them about their families, talked to them, do you believe in God? Do you know God loves you? And one of the phrases we always used was, Dios le ama y tiene un gran plan para su vida. God loves you, and he's got a great plan for your life. And this is kind of shocking to them in a little bit. How could God have a plan for me, right? So at any rate, we were there. We visited with the guys, had a great time. We were there about 3 hours. All said goodbye and left. And we were just really kind of taken back that these guys could, still be happy in there and still be familial, but yet still they were all gang members. Well, one of the things Ignacio had been going there, and one of the things they did, which was so interesting, this is on one wall they had painted the Last Supper, and on the other wall they had painted it full of a whole bunch of their gang sayings and gang signs. So what an interesting dichotomy, right? So they were some were believers, some were starting to have God active in their life. Okay, so this is what Ignacio's whole purpose was. Well, at any rate, it was quite something going there to Cárcel Preventiva, and I think I covered all my points. Yes, I did. So then, after that experience, I came back to Houston, and God was putting it on my heart to do prison ministry in Houston. And I thought, this doesn't sound right to me. I mean, yeah, I went there and all that, but God, why would you want me to go? I'm old, I'm white, I don't have any family members incarcerated. I've never been incarcerated. If I go into a prison and start doing something, I'm not going to have any credibility. Well, the thought just kept coming back to me, just go tell them about me. So I contacted Prison Fellowship, and Bill Lloyd was the field director at that time. He said, I'm starting a new program at the Carol Vance unit down in Sugar Land, which is part of the Jester complex. There used to be 4 prisons, there are now 3, but Carol Vance is Jester 2. So at any rate, I said, okay, well, I'll volunteer. So I volunteered to go in there, and that was in 2010, October 2010. So that was my first year to go there. What we did was we taught different classes. We had usually a little, Bill would give a short sermon. We had a certain topic. We'd work through certain books, kind of like Quest for Authentic Manhood and others. And so that's what started. I started going in 1 day a week, and sometimes I had to go in twice a week if I needed to substitute for somebody. But it was a great time. Going into Carol Vance was fairly easy. It was a faith-based unit. Everyone there was willing to listen to what the Bible said. We did have Muslims there. We had a lot of non-believers there, but these were men that had to volunteer to go there, and they had to be show some kind of appetite for changing their lives, and they were. And most of them were going to get out and back to society within 2 years. So I was in charge of a program called Transitional Ministry. Another program had 180 people. I had 25. And so I would go in and spend 4 hours there 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And it was just a powerful time. I got to know the men and got to pour into their lives. So it was very, very fulfilling. So that's all I was going to say about Carol Vance for the time being. I'll tell some more things later. But the next prison we went to was as a couple, it was in Guatemala. And I'm going to have Brenda tell you about the next prison. Well, I'm sorry, I apologize. That's a picture of the entrance to Carol Vance. And then the next prison we're going to tell you about is Los Gorriones.
Okay. So this prison was for young women. They were between 14 and 24. Some of them had small children in prison with them. Some of them were pregnant. Let's see. The day we went, Ignacio always would take a birthday cake in once a month, and everybody that had a birthday that month could celebrate. And so most of the girls were very happy and smiling, and there was one young woman who just sat there and was very, very angry. So afterwards we asked Ignacio, well, what was wrong with her? Everyone else seemed in a pretty good mood. He said, well, she hadn't been there too long. She had been convicted of murder. She was trying to get into a gang, and the initiation was she had to kill her principal. Well, she did. So she was in prison for that.
She was 14 years old.
Yeah, very young. You know, and they all look so innocent and everything. But anyway, so with her, we kept in touch with Ignacio, and after a few years, she had filed a claim against the prison that some of the women guards had abused her. And so she actually got out of prison a little bit early, which they normally don't let you out. And so she was waiting for the trial. And when we were in Guatemala one time, he said, do you want to go see her? Her trial's coming up very soon. And she had been out, she had been working. She couldn't live in the same neighborhood where her previous gang was occupying. She had to make sure she lived in a different neighborhood and didn't ever go in that one. So anyway, her trial went through and she got out. She got out permanently. And I guess that's pretty much it about that.
Yeah, that's good. Then now we're back in Houston again. You know, this story kind of weaves back and forth between a once a year mission trip and back in Houston. We're back in Houston, and we were doing some activities for prison fellowship. And one of the things we did was called A Day with Dad, and I'll let Brenda tell you about that as well.
Okay. This was really one of my favorite activities to be involved with. The men had to have not had any problems for a 6-month period. If they got in trouble once in that 6 months, well, then they couldn't be able to attend Day with Dad. So it was a really important thing. Their family was going to come and spend the day with them. And many of these families, could have lived way out in West Texas, so they had to drive a long ways. It was a big effort for the family to come. And so two of the stories I would tell is, well, one, you know how on TV they always look really nice, clean prison uniforms? Well, that is not the way it really is. Their uniforms are dirty and they're torn. But for special occasions, they will get them new uniforms. So the guys had brand new white uniforms, and they were standing in line to come into the room where they were going to greet their family. And this one little boy saw his dad and just took off running. And it was just a sweet moment. And then there was another young girl who was a teenager, and I was talking to her before the guys came out, and she said, well, I'm a little nervous. I haven't really talked to my dad in a long time. I don't know what to talk to him about. And I said, well, he'll probably ask you questions like how's school, something like that. But if he's kind of slow to start, just go ahead and start talking about school. And so when I saw them sitting, it was just the two of them sitting across from each other. In the beginning, it was very, kind of quiet and reserved. And then later on, when I saw them, they were all animated and really enjoying a good conversation. So that was the beauty of Day with Dad. And then the rest of the day was kind of like a fair. They had food, they had snacks, they had games. They had James Coney Island, which everybody was really excited about that. They had a popcorn machine, they had a snowball machine, and the two machines were run by inmates who had qualified to come, but perhaps I guess their family couldn't come or didn't want to come. So they at least got to go out and got to enjoy the day. Let's see, can you think of anything else from the day?
Well, no, I think you covered it really well, but I would just add that, Texas, can you still hear me okay from the mic? The Texas Department of Criminal Justice really, in the past 15, 20 years, putting a big emphasis on rehabilitation. So as you could probably tell, part of this project, Day with Dad, and then a few times in women's prisons, they had a Day with Mom. It's like, let's get the family members to spend some time, not at a small table, or make it a happy event and make it a sort of a family event. And one thing Brenda was going to say was that initially the kids go in with the dad, and there's a program for the caregiver, baby mama, wife, girlfriend, whatever, in another area, and then they're all united. So they got some one-on-one time with their kids. And so this was to say to them, look, your family's waiting for you out there. They love you out there. Change your attitude, change the way you live, change the way you look at life. Go out and be a productive member of society again. So I think it's such a strong program. So it was a lot of fun to be involved. Then our next project, and you're going to be talking some more, was that Bill Lloyd had kind of seen what Brenda did and knew her background and said, hey, Brenda, would you be willing to work with one of the chaplains at Plain State Jail? And there were 2,000 women at this jail in Dayton, Texas, and Brenda had to drive about an hour each way. Tell them a little bit about what you did there and how the women responded.
Okay, so I think at that time there were about 2,000 women, and most of them were there for a short period of time, maybe 2 years, something like that. It was primarily like DUIs, drugs, prostitution, and also they did, like, some criminals who had been found guilty in a court would be sent there and then sent to another prison. And if you remember the stiletto killer, she killed, her boyfriend was a professor at U of H. Anyway, she was there when I was there, but she didn't qualify to come to the classes. So I did not meet her, but most of the women were very excited to be there. It was, again, under the control of the chaplain, and our chaplain at that time was really a great lady, had a great group of people working with her. And I did the same classes that we did at the other prison. It was for anger, it was for grief, and forgiveness. And so at the first session, Bill Lloyd said, well, there's going to probably be 300 people, and I'm not really a speaker like some people are, so 300 sounded terrifying to me. So 300 came, but over time it really narrowed down to about 100. And so everything doesn't work as well in prison as it does here with slides like Frankie did and microphones. So I just said, well, I'm going to run it like a big group therapy. So I used the information from the books we used and do handouts, and the women were wonderful. They were very supportive of each other. Two examples that I have are, one young woman was there because she was with some other people. I don't know if it was a gang. She just said some other people, and they killed a man. And she was crying the whole time. She said, what I can't believe is his family is forgiving me. She said, we were horrible. And so she could not understand that. And the women were very comforting to her. And the other example, this was during kind of forgiveness and grief kind of overlap each other anyway. Well, this woman, her Mother had been driving a car like 20 years ago, and this lady's son was in the car, and her mother was in a car accident, and her son was killed. And all this time, she was angry at the other person who drove the car that hit her mother. She said, but what I really realized, I was angry at my mother. And I don't know, there might have been a whole lot of background there. But anyway, what was great was a lot of people, got a chance to think about things in their past, because like we always say, they're completely sober. They don't have to impress anybody. They've already been judged and convicted. So, we were just there to help them and help them, maybe move on with their life, so when they got out, they might not, end up back in prison.
So yeah, Brenda had a really effective program there working with the chaplain. And one story I remember that Brenda told me is that one of the women, after she got released, because a lot of the people that went there was going to be 6 months or so, and either they were going to be moved on to a prison or released. Well, she got released, and she called Brenda afterward, and Brenda talked to her and said, how are things going? Said, well, my dad picked me up, and we went, and he took me to an apartment that he had rented for me. And she said, I just stood there by the door, and my father said, well, is everything okay? What are you waiting for? She goes, I'm waiting for you to open the door. Because in prison, you don't open doors.
Right.
They're opened by the correctional officers.
With a key.
And it made me think of one story. I'm kind of going off script a little bit here, but it made me think of a story. I talked to this one man one time that after he got out, he called me and thanked me, for, like the lady did for Brenda, about the program and how powerful it was. And at any rate, and I said, so Joseph, I said, what's one of the things you're really enjoying, about being out in the free world again, being out in society? He goes, I get to take a shower by myself.
Which
that's something.
Is something else about that prison there. When I got there, they had just gotten shower curtains. They didn't have shower curtains. And we had discussed about talking about some of the downsides of being in prison other than the obvious. I mean, there were roaches everywhere. There was no air conditioning. Even in the chapel, which was considered one of their primary buildings, there was no air conditioning. They had a huge box fan, which helped, but it made so much noise. And you people in Austin Square know what I'm talking about with air conditioners. And anyway, so, it's not a pleasant place to be.
No, it's not a great place to be living your
and
life.
No exercise. There were no exercise facilities, and even the ones out at Carol Vance, they looked like antique things in a museum. It's not like you see on TV. I don't know. It's hard to believe, but
most of the prisons you see on TV are either private institutions or they're federal prisons, and they have air conditioning and heating. But in Texas, there are only 4 prisons that have air conditioning and heating, and they're all psychiatric units. All the rest don't have any. So the guards are in there sweltering. I'm in there sweltering. We had some rooms we could teach in that had some air conditioning, but it wasn't, especially at Carol Vance unit, it wasn't so bad. But it's not a real easy place to do your ministry.
And then the last thing about Plain State is we did do a couples program, and some of the couples were married and some of them weren't married, but they were together. And it was like a Friday night till I think we had lunch on Saturday. And again, the women got to wear clean white uniforms. They got to fix their hair. They wore makeup, didn't recognize some of them, it was just a whole different thing. And it was a good program. And again, we brought in food from the outside, pizza being the favorite, I think. But
yeah, free world food is what they call it, free world food. So then I don't have a whole lot to say about our next trip, but we did go, Brenda wasn't able to go with me on this one, but I went back to Guatemala, worked with Ignacio. We went into another woman's prison. It was for older women, and we did a typical thing where we would take in a meal, we'd have some fellowship with them, ask them about their lives, ask them about their family, ask them if they had any connection with God, and just passed out Bibles, and just had a good time of fellowship. And they were also appreciative because they knew that we were giving up our time in the United States and coming to visit with them, and it made them feel special. It made them feel needed, and we just told them, hey, God loves you. Just move forward from here. We returned. In returning back to the United States, I got involved in doing things for CHARM Prison Ministries. CHARM stands for Christ, Hope, and Reconciliation Ministry. And it's a friend of mine, Dave Trickett, and his wife, Kay Trickett. They had both been incarcerated, but they turned their lives around and they wanted to give back, so they started a prison ministry. It's been quite successful. They go into prisons and they, when Dave goes in, they go to men's prisons primarily, and they compete against the inmates, basketball or volleyball. And when they play basketball, they take in guys that are former high school stars, college stars. One guy, one time at Carroll Vance, the guy had not only been a college star, he was on the San Antonio Spurs professional basketball, and then from there he was on the Harlem Globetrotters. And afterward, he's put shooting baskets from half court and making them. And he was kind of a comedian. He'd go in there and he'd see one of the correctional officers, a female one, he'd say, Beyonce, I didn't know you worked here. It's good to see you. You look great today, and he was kidding everybody. And it was a lot of fun. He showed a lot of the basketball things that the Globetrotters do at the end of it. But Dave kind of used that as a hook. A lot of the men, they wouldn't come out of their cells. But if you got them to a sporting event or to watch a sporting event, they would come out, and then after the event, there was a church service. So it was kind of his hook to get it out. He also has aftercare programs now. He's got quite an effective ministry here in town. And I used to referee basketball at the basketball games since I'm a former basketball ref. Back to Guatemala. This was probably one of the craziest places we ever went. It's called Cárcel de Pavón. And think of it as a walled city. And inside the walls, this is a depiction of something similar to it. This place was pretty massive. It had about 2,000 men that were incarcerated there. There are no prison guards on the inside. The prison is completely run by the inmates. And they've got a whole government and a hierarchy and so on and so forth. And you best not get out of line or probably could get killed. I mean, it's just a very violent place. So Ignacio's brother was there, incarcerated, and he had I forget how long his sentence was, but one thing about the sentences in Guatemala, there's no parole. Brenda mentioned earlier that the girl got out, but that's because she had won a lawsuit for being tortured, in prison. But usually you don't get out. You got a 10-year sentence, 10 years. It could be longer if you do something else, but no parole. So at any rate, as we were getting ready to go into Pavón, there are 3 lines. There's one line of men, obviously I was in that one, and there's a line of women and children in the middle. And then there's a line of their girlfriends that are out on the right-hand side. Well, I don't always pick up on signals right away, but I figured out after a period of time, not all these women were girlfriends, okay? They were paid to go there. So at any rate, and 2 days a week they had visitation. People could go in from the outside. And when you checked in, when you checked in, Ignacio had told us, you cannot wear any shoes with shoelaces. I mean, I don't know why these guys would kill themselves inside a prison, or kill anybody else with a shoelace. They had other ways of doing it. But at any rate, that was the rule. So Brenda shows up with her
I wore
shoes.
Skechers.
Skechers with no shoelaces.
No shoelaces. And they told me, I had to turn my shoes in, and they would give me another pair. Well, the pair they gave me had shoelaces. And they were like these little suede pumps, and I'm like, oh my God. And in this picture, it looks paved, but it was really like being out in the country. It was outside of Guatemala City. It was like going back in time to a rural community. But anyway, so I had to turn in my shoes, and I thought, well, I'll probably never see them again. But at the end, oh, and they did charge me.
They rented her.
Yeah, they
the
rented
shoes.
me
Yeah.
the pumps.
She had to pay for it.
And then at the end, they were just sitting out by the fence. My shoes. But, and then are you going to talk about the...
Yeah, sort of the, it was so surreal going in. You go in, so we went in with Ignacio, his wife Sandra, and Brenda and I, and we went in and people start swarming you. You know, they want to know what your name is, they want to practice their English with you, they want to see what they might be able to get from you, okay? And so they follow you all around. And so the first thing we went past was a bakery, and then the next thing we go past is tables where they had made jewelry, and they were selling jewelry and all kinds of trinkets and things. Soccer balls, they made soccer balls by hand and laced them up, cut the material out, and so, and there was a, as it says on the slide, there was a pizza parlor, there was a hamburger place. They had taken old basketball courts and converted them into soccer fields, and they had a meth lab there, so they had all the meth they wanted free of charge. And somebody asked me, they said, well, where did they grow the marijuana? I said, oh no, they didn't. All the visitors could take in all the marijuana they wanted. The guards didn't care a bit, because if you could calm these guys down, it was all the better for them. So they would import all. They had a lumber yard inside. They built 3 churches, and so there'd be lumber that would be delivered periodically. And just think of it like, and they grew some tomatoes and some herbs and things. They also raised pigs, and they would slaughter them and have carnitas and chicharrones, and they were very enterprising. We went to a certain area to give, Ignacio had asked me to give a little short sermon, so I gave a sermon on the 3 things that God expects from us, and it was a sermon that I'd heard at church, so I didn't really write it, I just kind of plagiarized it in a way. I gave credit to the church. But at any rate, and then I had index cards with Bible verses in Spanish that supported all the points. So the guys would read those and they'd be a little bit involved in it. And then we had a lady that catered the meal that we paid for, and she came in from the outside with a really nice little meal for the guys that were in our group. So it was, they did also, they had turkeys in there, and I mentioned the pigs, and it was a walled city where you couldn't leave. Okay? Really quite something. So, they had a photo lab in there. They took our picture and developed it while we were there and gave us a photo of
Yeah, this guy would come and take our picture, and then 5 minutes he'd be back with the picture. It's like, how did he do that? I can't do that.
So it was a pretty powerful time there. So back to the States now. When I was working as a volunteer at Carol Vance, there was an assistant warden there, and she got promoted to warden, senior warden, at the Wayne Scott Psychiatric Unit. And it's on 99, and you can usually see it. It's like 3 stories tall, and this is a picture of the entrance, but it's got razor wire and towers and all that stuff. You can see it from 99. So the warden said, Mr. Markle, there are no programs here at all. These guys just sitting there, they get out of their cells for a couple hours a day and go to the rec area, but there's nothing going on here. Could you get some volunteers and start some kind of faith-based program here at the psychiatric unit? And I said, well, I'll look around, I'll see who I can get. And I said, if not, warden, I said, I'll do it, and I'll ask my wife to help me. So at any rate, couldn't find any volunteers to go into a psychiatric unit. Imagine that, huh? But at any rate, so, but first, before they let us in, the medical staff was a little bit concerned, like, who is this lady coming in? What's her background? Who's this guy? What kind of things are they going to tell these people? Are they going to undo some of the work that we're doing in group therapy and so on and so forth? Well, when they found out Brenda's credentials and that I'd been a volunteer for a long time, that she'd been a volunteer also, they said, okay, they can come in. So in 1999, we started the first faith-based unit inside one of the psychiatric units. There's 3 levels of people. The people that were allowed to come to our classes were low medicated, cognitive, and my favorite part, nonviolent, you know. We also always had a correctional officer in the room at all times. That was just policy. But we had some great programs there, made a lot of friends. These guys were just so happy to have us, and they, you know, little by little, they just got more and more comfortable with us as time went on.
Yeah, it always started off like the first and the second class. They'd be very, very quiet, you know, just kind of sit there, wouldn't talk. And then third, fourth, I mean, they would really open up and relax. But they were trying to see what we were like, I guess, and we were trying to see what they were like.
So that was one of the harder prisons to get into. We had to get wanded all the time. We had to take our belts off. We had to take our shoes off. They checked our shoes, bottom of our feet, you know.
They wand us.
They would, yeah, wanded us and patted us down and everything. And it usually took about 15 minutes to get in there, several series of doors to open to get in. So it was difficult to get in there. And also, one of my favorite things is when you walked near the guard tower before you got to this area, so they would let you in. They wanted to see your ID. So you could only take in a driver's license and your course materials. So what they would do for the guard tower is they would lower a plastic bucket on a rope. You put your ID in there, and they pulled it back up and looked at it, and then gave it back to you. I mean, I'm like, 2009, and we got a plastic. 2019, we got a plastic bucket. I mean, that just was crazy. But at any rate, it was, we had a powerful program there and really, helped change a lot of lives. Many of the guys are out. There are a few there that are just going to be there for the rest of their life, though, unfortunately. So then moving on from there, I'll just sort of mention that in the Carol Vance unit, in different places, and also in the Wayne Scott Psychiatric Unit, as Brenda said, we taught courses on anger, grief, loneliness, forgiveness. One of the things we did, one of the hooks that we had is that, especially at the psych unit, well, at all the units, was that if you come to 70% of the classes, you get a certificate of completion. And so we called them up one by one. Also, if you completed 3 courses, you graduated from the faith-based norm. They put on gowns and caps that we borrowed from one of the other prisons. And some of the people had never won an award before in their entire life. And they were just so thrilled. Big smiles on their faces. And then there was a meal. And at the end of all of the sort of groups of courses, we always had a pizza party. And so at any rate, we would, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but boy, they looked forward to that. So we had, and it was all the pizza you could eat. I'd get like 20 pizzas for 25 guys, kind of thing. So we had a great time. In terms of what our work accomplished, I would say the major thing is lives changed. When people start focusing on pleasing God rather than only pleasing themselves, they're not as likely to be drug dealers and cheat on their spouses or baby mamas or whatever it may be. They're good, they change from the inside out, and they become better, more productive people, when they get released, when they either get paroled or their sentence is up. At Carol Vance, they've been keeping records for either somewhere between 27 and 30 years when the program started there. And to this day, 87% of the people that go through the Carol Vance unit, the faith-based unit, never have returned to prison. And it's because of reading the Bible and having God in their lives. But there's another factor, and that is, as I said earlier, they all have to qualify, they all have to volunteer to go there. So it's kind of prison light, and there's a proclivity to want to change their lives and be more productive when they get out. But it's a very, very successful program. We're very proud of that. Frankie, I told Frankie about the award I won, and I don't really want to spend as much time on focusing on me. You've got something about it on the back of your program. But I would say the reason that I was thankful for receiving the Governor's Award, it was out of about 30,000 volunteers, Volunteer of the Year for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And what it really did was, it validated to me that the work was worthwhile. That the volunteers I had under me were doing a great job, working together closely with the wardens and all of the officers, like the captains and lieutenants and the sergeants and everything, and the day-to-day correctional officers, that it really was meaningful. And you know, we wanted to offer some thanks and respect. We always showed respect to the correctional officers because we wanted the men to do the very same thing. And I told the men, look, the reason Brenda and I started doing things for the correctional officers is because we respected them and respected what they did, you know. And I said, I wanted to model, and you should do the same, you know. Be respectful and don't get cases. Be respectful, and because they're just here, you know, their primary objective is they don't want anybody to escape. Second objective is they want everybody to be safe. There's a lot of effort being put on it's not that way at all prisons. Most of the prisons we went to weren't filled with gangs. There's, in the harder facilities, there's gangs, and there's always Bloods and Crips or some kind of African American or black gang. There's always a Latino gang. There's always a Caucasian gang, usually Aryan Brotherhood or something like that. And I always thought to myself, if I got incarcerated, you know, I'm from Detroit originally. I get along great with the African American community. I speak Spanish. I might want to join the Spanish gang, but I am white, so maybe I'd have to be in the white gang. I don't know. But anyway, thank God I never had to make that decision. I think I would have started some kind of Christian gang or something. I don't know. Anyway, but we would put on a Christmas party because a lot of the groups, even outside of us, take in free world food to these guys. Kairos goes in and puts on a whole weekend. There's all kinds of snacks that come in from the outside. Nothing can be homemade though. You know, they don't want to bake in any brownies with marijuana in it or anything. So, but all the stuff is quality food, quality beverages, and the guys are just, you know, so excited about that. Well, they're, you know, parading this past all the correctional officers, and I said to somebody one time, hey, what do you do for the correctional officers at at Christmas time? And they said, oh, well, we have a party for them, and we have coffee and cookies. I said, that's it? They said, that's it. I said, okay, that's going to change. So we would raise money, and we would do the main entree. We went to several different prisons in the Jester complex and put on a Christmas party. And to show, and we would always say to the officers, we're here because we respect you and respect what you do. It's hard duty. You know, you don't think about it. They're locked up too, only for 8 hours, 10 hours maybe, but they're locked up. They're in places that aren't air conditioned. They're in guys that are always trying to game them, you know, get some advantage over them. So it's not the most exciting occupation to have, but they really, you know, enjoyed the fact that we were respectful and we honored their work. So anyway, that's some of the things we did for them and what the experience has meant to us. Brenda, you have a comment or two?
It was just always a lot of fun. I mean, it would be like, oh no, I don't really want to go in today, I'm tired. But once you'd get in there and the guys would come in, it was really very rewarding for us just because they were so appreciative. Always at the end when we would be getting ready to leave, oh, be careful driving home, we'll see you next week. And you know, they were very, very nice. So. And funny. After they got to know us, they had their little jokes.
They joked around with us. Yeah, one time I went in after Easter, and so I said to the guys, so what does Easter mean to you? You know, what did you learn from Easter? And what the answer I was expecting was, you know, that, you know, Christ resurrected, you know, that there's eternal life after death. And so that's the answer I was looking for. And so this one guy raised his hand. I said, you know, so-and-so? He said, it proves zombies are real. So anyway, but the point, you know, not only was it funny, but the point is how comfortable they became with us that they could feel they could joke around with us, you know. So I think for me, seeing people, seeing how they changed their attitude about life and changed their attitude about things and got ready to go back to society, to me that was very rewarding. The other thing is that it's a very different population in some of the prisons, not in all. Some of them there's still some really hard prisons to go into, but you have a captive audience, no pun intended. So I had the opportunity of speaking with blacks and Latinos and other Caucasians that had made a really bad mistake in their life. I probably would have never been allowed to go into their neighborhoods or their barrios. I would have never been allowed to talk to them and share God's love with them, but I was able to there. So to me, that was really quite rewarding. So I tried to finish a few minutes early. I went about 5 minutes over that I wanted to, but we can stay for another 10, 15 minutes or so, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, John. And if you'd raise your hand, and Sue is going to take the microphone and bring it to you.
Well, obviously, you know everything there is to know about prisons in Texas and prisons in Guatemala. While you're thinking of something, I thought I'd mention to you that the guys down in the Jester complex, they all have jobs. So they're not making license plates. You know, they're cleaning the place, they're repairing things, they're painting things. Some are cooking in the kitchens. You know, if they realize that you have a skill, they put you to work. They all have jobs all the time. Some of the people at the Carol Vance unit had to be transferred by bus over to the psychiatric prison, and they had to go clean cells and mop the floors. And some of the conditions they saw were just absolutely horrible. They almost had to wear hazmat suits to go in and clean some of the cells. Some of the guys were just crazy. And any rate, and the thing that always made me sad is that when they got ready to go on the bus, they were put in shackles. And so these are guys I know that I'm in there with every week, you know, meeting with them, talking with them, getting to know them, and then same thing coming back. And they had to be strip searched. And so checking their body cavities and all that kind of stuff. So it just, you know, to me it was just dehumanizing. It just really made me feel bad whenever I was exiting or coming in and that kind of thing was going on. But it just wasn't an easy life. So we have a question now, Simber. Go ahead, Sue.
First, John and Brenda, thanks for coming. The question I have is for Brenda, did you do any actual counseling of the inmates? Excuse me.
When I was at Plain State, a little bit, because we were like a group therapy, but when we were at the psych prison, they had their own department. They had individual therapists, group therapists, occupational therapy. They had psychiatrists on staff. So none there really. I mean, I might make a general comment or something, but.
Okay, good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
Bet.
What was the rehabilitation like down in Guatemala? Do you know? Were there people that were able to be rehabilitated and then get out and change their lives? Were you aware of them?
Got it. The question was, what about rehabilitation in Guatemala? And the answer is very little. What Ignacio would do, he would go in and share God's love with them, teach them from the Bible, and there were lives changed through his efforts and through his helpers. Okay, but the dynamic that goes on in Guatemala and why it's very difficult to get volunteers to go into the prisons or to help their families on the outside, because most people have been affected by a gang member. Something horrific has happened in their lives that was due to a gang member. And they're not real wild about going in and helping these men and women out. So it's really a lot of the outsiders that are going in. There are other church groups that are going in too and helping Ignacio, but there's not as much as there is here in the United States. But good question. It's really, really kind of sad. The other thing too I would mention is that if you turn your life over to God as a gang member, you kind of can leave the gang and you kind of cannot. And what I mean by that is you can go ahead and get married and not be active in part of the gang activity. You don't have to kill people. You don't have to get involved in prostitution or collecting money for what's the word I'm looking for? It escapes me. Payoffs so that your business doesn't burn down. Okay. At any rate, you don't have to be an active member, but if the gang comes under attack, it's like the Army Reserves. You can get called up for service and then you have to go fight. But then you can go back to your family. But if you don't live a godly life, they put the green light on you. And that means any gang in the city can kill you without any retribution. So it's a death sentence. You better not fake it. Yeah, good question. Who else? Frankie. Okay, we've got one over here. Pat?
Churches go to Guatemala, or do they spread out and go to all the other countries as well?
Okay, yeah, the question is, what about churches going to Guatemala? There are a lot of churches that go there. Very few go inside the prisons like Brenda and I do because they're frightened. They don't want to be taken hostage. Thought never crossed our mind, so we were all prayed up before we went anyway. But the churches, there's a lot of church activity in Guatemala, but they go to schools, they go to child care places, guarderías. You can go to public school there and you can talk about God. Okay, they're just fine with it. They like you to bring in a meal along with it, but things are much more open there. And so there's a lot of church activity. One of the places we went on a mission trip was there is a school that's right at the edge of the great city dump that's in Guatemala. And so the children's parents that work in the dump, and what they do, think of it like low-cost recycling. They go through all the garbage when it's dumped. They open up all the garbage bags and go through and get bits of iron and see if they can find some jewelry and this and that and the other. And that's the way they make their living. Well, their kids go to a school right at the edge of it. So we'd go to private schools like that for really poor people. So churches do a lot of activity there. Another question from somebody? I know Frankie's got a question.
John, could you tell us, there was an article in the Chronicle recently about our aging prison population. People who've been in prison 25, 30 years.
Right.
And they've changed their lives, like the Birdman of Alcatraz.
Right.
And yet they can't get parole because of one of the things that you talked about, forgiveness from the victims. Could you speak to that?
Sure. We never had gone to a prison and been involved with people that had a life sentence or people on death row. But we've talked to a lot of correctional officers that worked at those kinds of places. And I have met a few people that came to work with the chaplain at the Wayne Scott Psychiatric Unit that were lifers. They were never going to get out. What happens sometimes is if you have a life sentence or if you're on death row, the only way you can get out is if you're paroled, and so you have to get approval from the parole board. Well, at a lot of these parole hearings, the families will show up and they'll talk about how horrific their daughter was, or son, or family member, whatever, was treated, and so they don't get a yes vote on parole. And the guys are always hopeful, even the lower offenses. They're very hopeful. They hey, John, pray for me. I got a parole hearing coming up. And one of the saddest days of their life ever is when they get denied parole. They just get very, very depressed. They get like, I prayed, I'm doing this, God's let me down. It's a really, very, that's one of the most difficult things, that and the Dear John letter from their wife who says, I'm going to wait for you till you get out, and hey, I got a new boyfriend now, letter, you know. But Frankie, the thing is, and you and I talked about this the other day, people that are lifers, they can do things and help out other prisons. They can become trustees. And so even though they know that they're never going to get out, they can still have a productive life, helping and teaching at other prisons or in the prison where they're currently working. There are education programs going on. There are, at the Darrington unit, which is now called Memorial, they started like a seminary. You could become a pastor in prison, okay? And there are groups that come from the outside that teach this. So hard as it may be, you still can lead a productive life in God's eyes, you know, even if you have a life sentence. So, yeah. Yes, Dennis.
Well, what is it about Guatemala and perhaps other countries in Central America that seem to promote gang and formation of gangs?
Okay, promoting the formation of gangs. It's, I would describe it this way, Dennis. That's such a good question. There is so much poverty in these Central American countries that the gangs, they have money, they have food, they will protect you, okay, from not only irresponsible policemen in the government, but from other rival gangs, and you become sort of a family. And what the gangs will do is they will start recruiting at a very, very young age. This happens especially in the really poor barrios, like in Zone 12 and Zone 13 in Guatemala, and they'll recruit. And here's the sad part about it. Several gang members will go to a family and they'll say, your 7-year-old daughter, it's time for her to join our gang. And I heard of a story one time where the parents went, please don't, you know, we do this and we do that and we need her here and that and the other. And they refused to let the 7-year-old daughter join the gang, okay? So what did the gang members do? Killed her. And then they said to the parents, okay, now we want the 6-year-old or this 8-year-old. And they're forced to join these gangs. It's just horrible. Part of it's a breakdown in the government. Part of it's a breakdown in so much poverty. But it's very, very difficult in the poor areas of these countries, of the Central American countries, to avoid being in a gang. There are people, of course, obviously, that are attracted to it. They have the money, they have the drugs, you know, they have a freewheeling lifestyle, you know, so it's sort of a combination of factors. But it's, you know, again, what Ignacio's trying to do and other people that are working there, they're trying to get more and more people to follow God's plan for their life whenever possible. But it's a challenge in these countries. Good question.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you from both of us.
Next, at 4:30, Pause at the Perch is going to feature tunes for animals. And these are the folks that will speak at the next Trace Talk. Suzanne Garza plays music for shelter animals. So if you want to preview, you can go Pause for the Perch at the Perch. Thank
Wonderful.
you, John and Brenda.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
You can, but I think it's kind of late now. Sorry.
Extortion is the word I was looking for.